With all due respect, one of the reasons we are in this sorry condition is the delusion that we have entertained as a nation for the last 10 or 15 years that we can have it both ways. We are engaged in a major world crisis here. We are engaged in a major war with Islamist extremism. We have ignored what the implications are of that, which is still going on. It is time for the President to change the paradigm of the whole framework of this dialogue. We are in a national emergency. He's got to treat it that way. The President must go to the people and declare this a national emergency, do the kinds of things that get everybody's attention, as they did in World War II. People in World War II weren't worried about stimulus laws and what the Congress was going to do. The President led, and we are facing a mortal threat of our way of life here.
Well, one can't help but reflect on how different the world, how different all of this would be if some years ago the political system had done what it should have done with respect to the long-term question of our vulnerability to oil and dependence. And it seems to me, at least, that maybe Ms. McCurry is wrong, but it seems to me that we now really need to not just turn this into a conversation, but turn it into a serious plan and execution against that plan.
This is an unprecedented political crisis for the President and geopolitical crisis for America's leadership in the world. The President's going to have to acknowledge that and be blunt about it. And I think he's willing to do that. He knows that he's likely to pay a very significant political price for it, but this is the moment of truth. And that's where we've been left because we didn't get it right a long, long time ago.
The participants walk out of the simulation with very similar reactions, which is they probably never felt that the problem could get so bad, it could get so bad so quickly, and that we are so impotent in actually dealing with the problem itself. And so what the simulation shows them is that you really do have to deal with the policies and deal with this problem before there's a crisis, and that there are no short-term solutions to the crisis. And I think the one thing on everyone's mind when they walk out of the simulation is, I wish they had done this 5 to 10 years ago in the previous government so we wouldn't have this problem today.
It was disturbing, and I think particularly for those of us who had been in the executive branch, had served in the President's cabinet, it reminded us of how quickly things can start to happen.
There was nothing detached from the real world about it. I thought it was very realistic and hence very useful.
As the exercise unfolded, I was surprised at how realistic the scenario was as it developed and how you could actually plausibly see some of these things happening. And of course, that was very troubling because it had an immediate, very negative impact on the macro economy and on our prospects for really making it through what was a very real crisis.
And this is based on a true crisis we see in the world today, a standoff between the Western world and Iran over their nuclear ambitions. And so you really have, I think, a fundamental shift in the simulation and a ratcheting up of the level of tension, and the oil markets responding in a much more dramatic way by raising the prices because you have people in power saying that they will actually withhold oil from the market, and they're capable of doing such a thing.
We've already had issues in the past several months with Chavez talking about cutting off supplies. You know, if that were to really happen, you're right in the situation that the scenario put us in.
A country like Venezuela, with a leader like Chavez, they want to say we're somebody in the world. What Chavez is doing and Venezuela is doing is saying the world has changed. We own the resource. We have a power that we didn't have before. You want our oil. You want our resources. He's also saying a little bit more than that, which is we've had a century or more of dominance of the global economy, all the industries, by the United States, by the French, by the Germans, by the British. He's now saying the map is changing. This power base, industrial power base I will call it, is shifting to those who own the resources, but it's also shifting to those countries, such as the countries like China and India, who are now producing supranational companies that can compete or replace our supranational companies. And he's marking a change in the world that the power structure is changing, or they want it to change. And they're using whatever resource they can, in this case oil, and those who have gas, to say, we're going to use that tool to say where the world's going to go. We're going to now help drive that as opposed to be told where it's going. That's what these countries are saying to us. This is a new reality.
One of these new, powerful, resource-rich areas is the Caspian Sea region.
We chose the Caspian because it's so important to the future of energy supply. If one looks at future supply for Western Europe, for the world, it's really some of the most major finds that we've had in the last decade. And so the primacy and importance of that oil supply, while being in a region surrounded by Russia and Iran, and then having tensions itself in the Caspian, provided both the great hope of oil in the future, but also the great concern.
The simulation begins with an attack on the world's oil infrastructure. How realistic is this possibility? And are the consequences themselves realistic?
It doesn't take a lot. I think that was probably, in some ways, one of the biggest takeaways for me, was you hit the system in 2 or 3 spots, which is not hard to do, and you have a real problem on your hand. We are seeing price runs right now without any of the kind of flashpoints that the scenario relies on to get to the price runs. And so imagine if you added a few of those flashpoints in to the mix. It's hard to even imagine.
One has to see, though, to distinguish between infrastructure that is exposed, but that can be fixed relatively quickly, and infrastructure that is a true choke point, and if actually hit or actually something happens to it, take months and months to fix.
That's why they are such premium targets, and the terrorists always have the advantage of surprise. They choose the time, and they choose the place. If there's a vulnerability in the facility protection scheme, they will find it and they will get through. And they have said that is what they want to target.
The thing about predictable disasters that's so exasperating is that we do know that they're coming, and yet we wait.
So what would happen in the real world in the face of events like those depicted in the simulation? And how likely is it that there could be a real oil shockwave?
If we have a disruption, a major one, another major war in the Middle East, or even a minor war in the Middle East, you can see the price go to wherever you might think it go. There's no limit to where the price would actually go. It's almost hard to imagine where it would go because the market is so scared on a day-to-day basis now, and it's been scared for 2 or 3 years, if not longer. The supply won't be there.
The potential supply interruption that is on everyone's mind right now in the summer of 2008 is someone going to go to war with Iran, whether it be the United States or Israel, because of concern that how Iran might respond. Iran not only is one of the most significant producers of oil in the world, but it abuts the Strait of Hormuz, which is the most vital choke point for the flow of oil in the world. And they have threatened to take military action to slow or stop the traffic of oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz.
Located between Oman and Iran, the Strait of Hormuz connects the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. Each day, 20% of the world's oil must pass through the strait, making it the most vital choke point in the world. Any interruption of this flow could be catastrophic for the global economy.
Oil dependency and national security and the common defense of the United States and its allies are one and the same. They're different facets of the same reality. To lose access to oil for any period of time, measured in days, not even weeks, is potentially a catastrophic attack such as we've never experienced before in terms of the disruption, hardship, and damage to Americans that one thinks of in terms of defending against attack.
Some commentators speculated on $400 oil in 2 to 3 years' time without a disruption of supply. Put a disruption in place and you definitely have $400 a barrel.
Well, what you see, say it happens in December, and suddenly there's no oil deliveries to homes, and there's no more fuel for trucks to transport goods and services, and factories shut down, I mean, very swiftly.
Airlines are not going to fly as often. They're going to cancel their routes. They're going to go bankrupt. Car companies are going to lay off workers and shut down factories because they either aren't selling cars or they can't sell the cars that they expected to sell several years before. The stock market will tumble because people have confidence issues based on a global recession. If it is a major shock, you can see potentially even force majeure of contracts where companies literally say, we are unable to fulfill the contract that we had agreed to years ago because of this unforeseen, absolutely devastating price rise. And so you're going to see an increase in costs in everything that we do, in everything that we consume, in everything that we see every day. And that is going to dramatically change our lives for that period of time.
We're going to have to spend money that we might have spent on health care, we might have spent on something else. We're going to have to spend on the higher cost of oil, and then we're going to have to spend on the transition from oil.
And while the results of a sustained interruption could throw the U.S. economy into a deep recession, or perhaps worse, the effects for the developing nations of Latin America, Africa, and Asia would be devastating.
Other nations that are on the margin to begin with, other nations that have tiny little amounts of discretionary spending in their budgets, are not going to be able to do any of the things that they need to do and wanted to do on education, on public health, on removing the conditions that often breed unrest, insurgency, and terrorism. Insurgency and terrorism grow out frequently, not always, but frequently, out of poverty. And poverty alleviation is just not going to get done because no one's going to have the money for it.
Think of the risk of boat people leaving a country where they can't, where there's no food to eat, and suddenly millions of people getting on boats and traveling across oceans and becoming refugees. I mean, this could be a global problem. It could lead to the fall of governments. It could lead to political instability around the world. And this is exactly what people are worried about. This is what I worry about. The government security industry has recently come up with a report looking at the global risks, what could be affecting the U.S. in 2009 and 2010. And they have put the instability coming from rising energy prices and rising food prices on a top list of risks that could affect the U.S.
Not only does the simulation reveal to the participants the catastrophic dangers posed by a sustained interruption in the supply of oil, it also reveals to us all that we are literally living in a new world, a new geopolitical reality.
It's a new reality. It's not just a new reality of supply and demand, or rather demand growing rapidly and supply trying to catch up. It's a new reality of a new world. It's the world of the geopolitics of energy. It's a completely different world. You have a country like Russia, the world's largest, almost, energy resource country, with coal, with oil, with gas, with uranium, and most of all the other precious metals, by the way, who was down on its back 10 years ago. Now it's not on its back any longer. Its source of power in the world is energy.
Well, there is an interesting shift in the de facto power of areas of the world. And certainly with the United States sending $700 billion a year to countries that don't, many of them like us, and some of them actually are supporting jihad against us, is not a very good thing, because you're making those countries, most of whom do not share our democratic values and our attitude towards women's rights and equality and so forth, you're making them very, very, very much more powerful than they ever have been, and much more powerful than many of the industrialized nations in the world.